The quiet beginning is not defined by emptiness or inactivity, but by subtlety. On the surface, everything appears normal. Routine continues, systems function, conversations follow familiar paths. Yet beneath this apparent calm, something has already shifted. The quiet beginning is the moment before awareness catches up to reality. It is when change has started but has not yet announced itself. These periods are often overlooked because they do not match our expectations of disruption. There is no noise, no spectacle, no clear signal demanding attention. Instead, there is a sense of stillness that feels heavier than usual, a calm that carries tension rather than peace. History shows that the most consequential transformations often start this way, unnoticed, underestimated, and dismissed as background noise. In a quiet beginning, early indicators exist but lack a narrative to bind them together. A small anomaly here, an unexpected result there. Nothing alarming on its own. People tend to interpret these moments through existing frameworks, assuming continuity rather than change. Comfort plays a role. Accepting that something big is forming requires cognitive effort and emotional readiness. It is easier to believe that tomorrow will look like yesterday. The quiet beginning thrives on this human tendency. It does not force attention. It waits. And because it waits, it grows. There is also an asymmetry of awareness during this phase. A very small number of observers, often those closest to the source of change, sense that something is different. They may not fully understand it yet, but they feel the deviation. Their language becomes cautious, speculative. They say things like, "This is interesting," or "We should keep an eye on this." These are not declarations, they are instinct. Meanwhile, the majority remain unaware, not because they are careless, but because nothing has yet violated their expectations strongly enough to demand reinterpretation. Yeah. The quiet beginning is powerful precisely because it hides in plain sight. As the quiet beginning settles in, the environment becomes fertile for misjudgment. Signals are weak, fragmented, and easy to rationalize. Institutions, markets, and cultures are especially vulnerable here because they are optimized for stability, not for sensing early discontinuities. Decision-making frameworks reward evidence that confirms existing trajectories. Anything that suggests a break from the norm is treated as an outlier. This is not failure, it is design. But it means that by the time the quiet beginning is widely acknowledged, it has already passed. What remains is acceleration. Strange signals appearing marks the transition from pure subtlety to uneasy curiosity. These signals are not yet loud, but they are distinct enough to raise questions. They do not fit cleanly into established models. Something behaves differently than expected. A response is faster, slower, larger, or more effective than it should be. An idea spreads in an unusual pattern. A reaction happens without the usual triggers. These signals are strange, not because they are inexplicable, but because they challenge assumptions that have gone unquestioned for a long time. What makes these signals especially important is their inconsistency. They appear sporadically, not in a neat sequence. This irregularity makes them easy to dismiss as coincidences or age casing. People are trained to look for trends, not anomalies. Yet anomalies are often the earliest messengers of transformation. Strange signals do not ask to be believed, they ask to be noticed. They are fragments of a future state leaking into the present, incomplete and therefore unsettling. At this stage, interpretation becomes the central struggle. Different observers draw different conclusions from the same signal. Some see opportunity, others see risk, and many see nothing at all. Because the signals are strange rather than overwhelming, authority becomes ambiguous. No single voice can claim certainty. This creates a vacuum where speculation grows. Conversations begin to include phrases like, "Have you seen this?" or "That's hard." These are the first cracks in collective confidence. They indicate that the existing narrative is starting to strain under new evidence. Strange signals also tend to expose who is paying attention and who is not. Those who are curious lean in, gathering more data, connecting dots, asking uncomfortable questions. Others double down on familiar explanations, treating the signals as noise to be filtered out. This divergence matters. It marks the early separation between those who will adapt early and those who will be forced to adapt later. Importantly, no one yet knows which group is right. That uncertainty is part of the tension. The signals are not strong enough to settle the debate, only strong enough to start it. There is an emotional dimension here as well. Strange signals often provoke mild discomfort rather than fear. They create a sense that something is off without providing clarity on what to do about it. This ambiguity can be more destabilizing than obvious threats. Humans prefer clear problems with clear solutions. Strange signals offer neither. They sit in the mind unresolved, quietly eroding confidence in the status quo. Over time, as more signals appear, the discomfort compounds. Together, the quiet beginning and the appearance of strange signals form the foundation of major change. They are not dramatic moments, but they are decisive ones. Once signals appear, the quiet is no longer pure, it is charged. Awareness begins to spread slowly and unevenly. What follows will feel sudden to many, but it is only sudden because these early stages were ignored, misunderstood, or underestimated. By the time the change announces itself loudly, it has already been in motion for a long time. Patterns no one noticed before begin to surface, not because they are new, but because conditions have changed enough for them to become visible. These patterns were always forming quietly in the background, dispersed across time, behavior, data, or culture. Individually, each instance looked insignificant. Together, they form a shape that only becomes clear once someone steps back far enough or looks closely enough to see the repetition. This stage is less about discovery and more about recognition. The information was available, but attention was not aligned to detect it. What makes these patterns difficult to notice is that they rarely announce themselves in obvious ways. They do not arrive as clean trends or neat graphs. They appear as recurring oddities, similar decisions made by unrelated actors, parallel innovations emerging independently, or consistent reactions to new stimuli. Because they don't fit into a single category, they slip through analytical cracks. Specialists may see fragments within their own domains, but miss the broader convergence happening across boundaries. Patterns require synthesis, and synthesis is often undervalued until it becomes unavoidable. Once noticed, these patterns create unease. They suggest that events are not random, that something structural is forming beneath surface-level explanation. This challenges the comforting belief that the world is predictable through linear cause and effect. Patterns imply momentum. They hint that outcomes are being shaped by forces larger than any single decision or actor. At this stage, people begin to ask different questions. Not to why did this happen, but to why does this keep happening? That shift in questioning signals a deeper engagement with change. Patterns also reframe responsibility and agency. If the same outcomes are emerging repeatedly, it suggests that existing systems are producing them by design rather than by accident. This realization can be uncomfortable, especially for institutions or leaders who benefit from the status quo. Acknowledging patterns means acknowledging that small fixes may no longer be sufficient. It implies that whatever is coming is not a fluke, but the result of accumulated pressures, incentives, and blind spots. The future starts to feel less negotiable and more directional. As awareness of patterns spreads, interpretation becomes contested. Different groups claim different meanings from the same observations. Some see inevitability, others see opportunity, and others see threat. This disagreement is not a weakness. It is a signal that the patterns are real enough to matter. If they were meaningless, they would not provoke debate. The conversation begins to move from isolated events to systemic implication. This is the moment when foresight becomes possible, but only for those willing to connect dots without complete certainty. A shift in the atmosphere follows almost imperceptibly. Nothing tangible may have changed yet, but the emotional and psychological environment feels different. Conversations carry more tension. Language becomes more cautious or more charged. People speak in hypotheticals and future-oriented terms. There is a growing sense that timing matters, that decisions made now may carry disproportionate weight later. The atmosphere becomes dense with anticipation, even if no one can clearly articulate why. This shift is collective rather than individual. It shows up in tone, pacing, and attention. Meetings feel more urgent. Silence lasts longer. Reactions feel sharp. People are quicker to read between the lines. Even those who cannot identify specific causes begin to sense that stability is no longer guaranteed. The atmosphere is shaped by shared intuition rather than shared facts. It is the emotional response to accumulated signals, patterns, and uncertainties converging. Importantly, a shift in the atmosphere does not require consensus. In fact, it often emerges precisely because consensus is breaking down. When different interpretations coexist, uncertainty increases and uncertainty alters behavior. People hedge, pause, or accelerate depending on their risk tolerance. This divergence amplifies the feeling that something is changing. The environment starts to feel less forgiving of delay and less tolerant of complacency. Waiting begins to feel like a decision rather than a neutral state. This atmospheric shift also affects perception of time. The future feels closer, heavier, more present. Long-term plans are re-examined. Assumptions that once felt solid start to feel provisional. There is an unspoken awareness that windows may open or close suddenly. Even without concrete evidence, people begin to act differently, gathering resources, repositioning themselves, or simply paying closer attention. The atmosphere primes the system for movement. Together, patterns no one noticed before and the shift in the atmosphere represent the transition from hidden change to felt change. The mind starts to catch up with reality, even if it cannot yet explain it. Logic trails intuition. Analysis follows emotion. This is the stage where denial becomes harder to maintain, not because proof is overwhelming, but because the collective mood has changed. Something is no longer just happening in the background. It is now shaping how people think, feel, and prepare, even before it fully reveals itself. Whisper spreading marks the moment when private uncertainty becomes shared curiosity. What was once sensed individually begins to move through informal channels. Side conversations, offhand comments, subtle signals exchanged between peers. These whispers are not official statements or public declarations. They are fragments of concern and intrigue passed quietly from one person to another. Their power lies in their informality. Because they are not attached to authority, they feel more honest, more instinctive. People trust whispers not because they are verified, but because they echo what they themselves have been feeling but have not yet articulated. As whispers spread, they form an underground network of awareness. No single whisper carries much weight, but together they create resonance. The same themes reappear in different contexts, suggesting that something is unfolding beyond isolated perception. This is how shared intuition develops. Individuals begin to realize that their unease or curiosity is not unique. Validation emerges not through data, but through repetition. The realization that others are noticing this too is a turning point. It transforms vague suspicion into collective attention. Whispers also change the social dynamics of information. People become careful about who they talk to and how they phrase things. Language grows coded. Questions are asked indirectly. Humor and irony are used to test reactions without committing to a position. This ambiguity protects the speaker while still advancing the conversation. In environments where reputations, careers, or credibility are at stake, whispers allow exploration without exposure. They are the safest way to approach uncertainty. At the same time, whispers bypass formal filters. They move faster than reports, policies, or official messaging. Institutions may still be silent, but the network hums with quiet speculation. This creates a gap between official reality and lived reality. The longer that gap persists, the more trust shifts toward informal channels. People begin to rely on peers rather than authorities for early understanding. This redistribution of trust is subtle but profound. It sets the stage for later disruption in who is believed and who is followed. Data doesn't add up is the moment when intuition collides with evidence. Numbers, metrics, and measurements that once aligned neatly with expectations begin to show inconsistencies. Projections miss their targets. Models require increasing adjustments. Outcomes diverge from forecasts in ways that cannot be easily explained by chance. At first, these discrepancies are treated as errors, bad inputs, flawed assumptions, temporary noise. But as they persist, they become harder to ignore. What makes this stage destabilizing is that data is supposed to be neutral and authoritative. When it stops reinforcing existing narratives, confidence erodes. People who rely on data for decision-making experience cognitive dissonance. They must choose between trusting the tools that have served them well in the past and acknowledging that those tools may no longer be sufficient. This is not a technical problem alone. It is a psychological one. Letting go of trusted models feels like stepping into the dark. As inconsistencies accumulate, attempts to patch the system increase. More variables are added, more exceptions carved out, more explanations layered on top of one another. The complexity grows, but clarity does not. This is a sign that the underlying assumptions are no longer valid. The system is being stretched to explain a reality it was not designed for. The data isn't wrong. It is revealing the limits of the framework interpreting it. This moment also exposes fault lines between different groups. Those invested in maintaining the current narrative work to contain the discrepancies, framing them as manageable or temporary. Others see the same numbers as confirmation that something fundamental is changing. The same data set supports opposing conclusions, not because one side is dishonest, but because they are optimizing for different outcomes, stability versus adaptation. This tension sharpens debates and accelerates polarization around interpretation. Importantly, when data doesn't add up, action often slows even as urgency increases. Decision makers hesitate, waiting for clarity that never fully arrives. The instinct to avoid mistakes competes with the risk of inaction. Meanwhile, the environment continues to change. Those willing to act on imperfect information begin to pull ahead, not because they are more certain, but because they accept uncertainty as the new baseline. Together, whispers spreading and data not adding up mark the erosion of comfortable certainty. Hudson, what began as a feeling now has enough substance to demand attention. The informal and the analytical converge, reinforcing each other. Intuition finds support in evidence, even if that evidence is messy and incomplete. At this point, it becomes clear that ignoring what is happening carries its own risks. The question shifts from "is something happening?" to "how much time is left before everyone else sees it too?"